The wind howled through the dense forest, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth as the moon cast a pale glow over the isolated cabin. Inside, Ethan sat by the crackling fire, his rugged hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The solitude of the mountains was his refuge, a place to escape the chaos of a life he'd left behind. His dog, Rusty, lay curled at his feet, ears twitching at every rustle outside. A sharp knock at the door shattered the quiet, startling both man and beast. Ethan froze, his pulse quickening. No one came this far into the wilderness, not at this hour. He set the mug down, his calloused fingers brushing the handle of the hunting knife on the table. Another knock, softer but urgent, echoed through the wooden walls. Rusty growled low, hackles raised. Ethan approached the door cautiously, peering through the small window. A woman stood there, shivering, her silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. Her clothes were tattered, barely clinging to her frame, her hair matted with dirt and leaves. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto his through the glass. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I need help." Ethan hesitated, his instincts warring between caution and compassion. She looked desperate, vulnerable, like a wounded animal seeking shelter. He unbolted the door, the creak of the hinges loud in the silence, and let her in. She stumbled forward, collapsing against the wall, her breath ragged. "Thank you," she gasped, clutching the torn fabric around her shoulders. Ethan's gaze lingered on her, noting the bruises on her arms, the way her hands trembled. Who was she, and what had brought her to his doorstep in such a state? The woman sank onto the worn rug by the fire, her body trembling as the warmth began to seep into her. Ethan handed her a blanket, his eyes scanning her for answers she hadn't yet given. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. She hesitated, her gaze darting to the flames. "Leela," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Leela, what happened to you?" He pressed, crouching beside her. She pulled the blanket tighter, her knuckles white. "A broken bar I was running," she said, her words halting. "From what?" Ethan's tone sharpened, suspicion creeping in. The mountains were no place for a woman alone, especially not in rags. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't. A broken bar. I don't know where to start," Rusty whined, sensing her distress, and nudged her hand. Leela flinched but then softened, stroking the dog's fur. Ethan stood, torn between pressing for answers and giving her space. He poured hot tea into a chipped mug and set it beside her. "Drink this. You're safe here, for now." She nodded, her fingers wrapping around the mug, though her eyes remained haunted. Outside, the wind screamed, rattling the windows. Ethan glanced at the door, half expecting another knock. "You're not from around here," he said, more a statement than a question. Leela's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she stared into the fire, as if it held the secrets she couldn't voice. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen that look before, real fear mixed with something deeper, something that made his gut twist. Whoever she was, trouble had followed her here. As the night deepened, Leela's story unraveled in fragments, each word heavy with pain. She spoke of a car breaking down on a remote road, of a stranger who offered help but turned predator, of a desperate escape through the forest that left her bruised and torn. Ethan listened, his face unreadable, though his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You're lucky you made it here," he said, his voice low. "Not many do." Leela's eyes met his, searching for something to trust, perhaps, or judgment. "I didn't know where I was going," she admitted. "I just kept running until I saw your light." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. The nearest road was miles away, and the terrain was unforgiving. How had she survived? He glanced at her torn clothes, the scratches on her legs. Something about her story felt incomplete, but he pushed the thought aside. She needed help, not interrogation. He offered her a spare shirt and pants from his closet, worn but clean. "Get changed," he said, turning to give her privacy. As she dressed, he busied himself stoking the fire, trying to ignore the unease settling in his chest. Rusty lay beside Leela now, his loyalty already shifting to the stranger. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that her arrival was no accident. The mountains hid secrets of his own, include Dita, and Leela's presence felt like a spark in a tinderbox. He glanced at the rifle mounted above the fireplace. "You can stay tonight," he said, his tone firm. But tomorrow, we figure out what's next. Dawn broke with a gray haze, the forest shrouded in mist. Ethan hadn't slept, his eyes fixed on the door as Leela dozed by the fire, wrapped in his clothes and the blanket. Her face, softened in sleep, looked younger, almost fragile, but the bruises told a different story. He brewed coffee, the bitter aroma filling the cabin, and checked the windows for signs of movement. Nothing but trees and fog. Rusty stirred, nudging Leela awake. She blinked, disoriented, then sat up, clutching the blanket like a shield. "Morning," Ethan said, handing her a mug. She took it with a murmur of thanks, her eyes avoiding his. "We need to talk," he said, sitting across from her. "You can't stay here forever, and I need to know what I'm dealing with." Leela's shoulders tensed, her fingers tightening around the mug. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said quietly. "No family, no friends?" Ethan asked, his tone skeptical. She shook her head. "Not anymore." Her voice cracked, and Ethan felt a pang of guilt for pushing. But he couldn't afford to be careless. He'd built this life to stay hidden, to keep the past buried. Leela's arrival threatened that. "There's a town 20 miles east," he said. "I can drive you there, get you to a shelter or a bus." Leela's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "No, I can't go back. They'll find me." Ethan leaned forward, his voice low. "Who's they?" She looked away, her silence louder than words. The air grew heavy, the unspoken truth hanging between them. By midday, Ethan had decided he couldn't keep Leela here, but he couldn't abandon her either. Her fear was real, even if her story was incomplete. He packed a bag with supplies of food, water, a first aid kit and checked his truck's fuel. "We'll head to town," he told her, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You can figure out your next move there." Leela nodded, but her eyes darted to the windows, as if expecting someone to emerge from the trees. Ethan noticed, his suspicion deepening. Was she running from a person, or something bigger? He handed her a jacket, too large but warm, and led her to the truck. Rusty jumped into the backseat, tail wagging. The drive was quiet, the dirt road winding through towering pines. Leela stared out the window, her hands twisting in her lap. "You don't trust me," she said suddenly, her voice soft but clear. Ethan glanced at her, his grip tightening on the wheel. "I don't know you," he replied. "Trust is earned." She nodded, as if expecting that answer. "Fair enough," she said, but her eyes held a flicker of something, a resolve, maybe, or defiance. The truck hit rut, jostling them, and Ethan's gaze flicked to the rearview mirror. A glint of metal caught his eye. Far behind them, another vehicle? His pulse quickened. "Leela," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Is there something you're not telling me?" She turned to him, her face pale. "I want to," she whispered. "But if I do, you'll wish you never opened that door." The truck crumbled along, the forest closing in around them. Ethan's eyes flicked between the road and the rearview mirror, the glint of metal no longer visible but lingering in his mind. Leela sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly, as if bracing for impact. "Talk," Ethan said, his voice low but commanding. "If someone's following you, I need to know what I'm up against." Leela bit her lip, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "It's not just one person," she said finally. "It's a broken bar, a group. They're dangerous." "Ethan, I didn't mean to drag you into this." His jaw clenched. "A group that changed everything. What do they want with you?" he asked, his tone sharp. She hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "I saw something I shouldn't have. A deal, out in the woods. Drugs, money, weapons. I don't know the details, but they saw me. I ran, and they've been hunting me since." Ethan's mind raced. The mountains were a haven for outlaws, smugglers, poachers. Worse, he'd avoided them, kept his head down. Now, Leela had brought that world to his doorstep. "Why didn't you go to the police?" he asked. She laughed bitterly. "They own the police." The weight of her words settled over him. He glanced at the mirror again, and nothing but trees. "We'll get you to town," he said, though don't nod at him. "Then you're on your own." Leela nodded, but her eyes held a plea. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Ethan didn't respond, his focus on the road and the growing sense that trouble was closer than he'd thought. The town came into view, a scattering of buildings nestled at the foot of the mountains. Ethan pulled into a gas station, the truck's engine idling as he scanned the area. Leela sat hunched, her borrowed jacket swallowing her frame. "Stay here," Ethan said, stepping out to fill the tank. He kept one eye on the road behind them, the other on Leela through the window. She looked small, fragile, but there was a steel in her eyes he hadn't noticed before. Inside the station, he paid in cash, avoiding the clerk's curious glance. When he returned, Leela was staring at a black SUV parked across the street, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. "Ethan," she said, her voice tight. "That's them." His heart thudded, but he kept his face calm. "Stay low," he said, sliding into the driver's seat. He pulled out slowly, watching the SUV in the mirror. It didn't move, but he felt its presence like a predator waiting to strike. "What do they look like?" he asked, his voice steady. Leela described them as 3 men, armed, ruthless. "They won't stop," she said, her voice trembling. "Not until they get me." Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. He could drop her off, walk away, keep his life untouched. But the memory of her standing at his door, broken and desperate, burned in his mind. He took a sharp turn, heading not toward the town center but back into the mountains. "What are you doing?" Leela asked, panic rising. "Buying us time," he said, his voice grim. He didn't know her full story, but he knew one thing: he wasn't turning her away. The truck climbed higher into the mountains, the road narrowing to a rugged trail. Ethan's mind churned, piecing together a plan. Leela's story, fragmented as it was, pointed to something bigger: organized crime, maybe, or something worse. He glanced at her, her face pale but resolute. "You're not telling me everything," he said, his tone flat. She flinched but didn't deny it. "I'm trying to protect you," she said softly. "You don't deserve this." Ethan snorted. "Lady, I stopped deserving things a long time ago." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask. The cabin was too exposed now, but he knew these mountains had hidden trails, old hunting shacks. They could lie low, figure out their next move. The SUV hadn't followed, but Ethan wasn't naive. They'd come. He pulled off the trail, concealing the truck behind a thicket. "We walk from here," he said, grabbing the bag of supplies. Leela followed, Rusty at her side. As they trekked onto the dense forest, the air grew colder, the silence heavy with unspoken questions. "Why are you helping me?" Leela asked, her breath visible in the chill. Ethan paused, his back to her. "Because I know what it's like to run," he said finally. He turned, meeting her gaze. "But if we're gonna survive this, you need to trust me." "All of it, Leela." "No more secrets." She nodded, her eyes steady for the first time. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, Ethan felt the weight of his choice. Whatever came next, there was no going back for either of them.